I love just even the summary treatment you say after dealing with Galatians 3:10 a little bit. You write clearly here that with this reference to Deuteronomy 30, that has a Christological interpretation of the law, that Christ is the one who keeps it, bears its curse, and pours out its blessing on those who call on his name in faith. And then, just to reiterate how we need to see Christ in the relationship of the law there, and not be antinomians, but to understand properly what that union with Christ means and how he has satisfied the demands of the law for us, so that now we do obey him out of love and gratitude for all that he has done for us in bringing us new life in his name.
And I'd even say that this is the case for Old Testament believers as well.
Right.
That through Deuteronomy 30, verses 11 to 14, what they are being called to do is to place their faith in the coming Messiah.
Right.
To place their faith in the one who is coming. So even for them, it's always a spirit-wrought faith that works out obedience by circumcising our heart and working obedience in us.
Yeah, that gets to the heart of the matter regarding some of the issues that the OPC Study Committee was dealing with a couple of years ago, and the relationship of the law and the gospel. Law and gospel is a phrase that gets used and applied in a variety of ways. So if you just hear someone say, well, what's your thoughts on law and gospel? You need to ask a few questions. Well, what are we talking about here? Are we talking about works righteousness versus belief in Christ by being saved by grace through faith? Well, nobody's for law in that regard. But are we talking about, normally what we're talking about and what the Westminster Standards speak about is a redemptive historical epochs or periods. So we have the administration of the law and then the administration of the gospel. In other words, the Old Covenant and the New Covenant. And the Old Covenant is an administration of the covenant of grace, so that the Old and New Covenant have the same substance, which is Christ. And that being said, there is no distinction or competition between the Old and the New, but the law being an administration meant to lead people as a pedagogue or a tutor unto Christ. And now having the birth of Christ, his life, death, and resurrection, and the final coming of the Lord, and this new covenant era being instituted in his own blood, we don't relate to Christ at all through Moses. He was a faithful servant in God's house, but Jesus Christ is a son. And we have the Son. We have a mediator who intercedes at God's right hand for us, who's entered into the holy places by his own sacrifice. And so all that's to say that clearly Old Testament saints were not saved by works.
Right.
And the law never, ever was presented as a way by which Israel might save themselves.
No. Never.
But it always had a Christ-centered focus, because Jesus is not only the center, but he's the substance of the Old Testament law.
Yeah, so it's important. We were talking in class just the other day. He's not just the center in terms of he is the content of the Old Testament, which he, but he's the center in terms of the central redemptive subject matter, and that he is the subject of their faith, being presented in prophecies, types, sacrifices, the so on and so forth, that the confession says. And was it 7:5?
And 8:6. Those are some of probably my two favorite sections of the confession on this point. 7:5 and 8:6 talk very clearly about that substance and the unfolding of it through promises, types, and sacrifices. Yeah.
And so what is communicated to the saints of old through the law is Christ. And they have their salvation in him.